Howdy, gang. Come on in, pull up a chair, and take a load off. Welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host, here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. If you follow the Gaming Gang at all, you know from time to time I like to share what I consider to be op-ed videos. Now, sometimes it's regarding something that's going on in our hobby. Other times, it's to address a question or questions that I've received multiple times from visitors and viewers. Today, I want to talk about something that I hear a ton. And these emails usually boil down to something along the lines of, hey, Jeff, I would love to run Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder 2nd Edition or Call of Cthulhu or Traveler or insert tabletop role-playing game name here with my friends or family or coworkers or schoolmates, what have you. But when I look at the rules, I am terrified. Or I've been paging through the rule book or rule books, and I'm really intimidated by the sheer amount of rules that I'm supposed to need to memorize in order to run XYZ game. Sometimes I have people reach out and they say, hey, Jeff, you know what? My memory's not that great. I cannot imagine having to process all that information in the rule book, put it into my memory bank, and then access it while I run this game. And I get it. I completely understand. It is not easy to get started as a game master with role-playing games. As much as people would love to tell you how just anybody can do it, that's not the case. But you should never allow the rules to derail your fun with a tabletop role-playing game. Never, never allow that to happen. And I'm going to give you a few tips that I would recommend to make your life easier. So right off the bat, first thing that I tell people when they mention, wow, you know what, I was blown away by all the rules that I need to know in order to run whatever, I tell them, first thing you need to focus on is, what is the core resolution mechanic? How do you resolve action in this game? Could be flipping a coin, right? That would be an action resolution. Heads or tails, baby. Of course, that's not how these games work, but still. So as an example, let's use 5e D&D. So for the most part, you're looking at a 20-sided die is going to be rolled, and then modifiers will be added or subtracted to that number. And then you're going to compare it to a DC, effectively a difficulty challenge, a challenge number that the Dungeon Master provides. And of course, there's all these tips and information about how do you set the DC. So that die roll with modifiers needs to meet or exceed a particular number for success to be gained. If you roll less than that, then you've failed. Now, of course, there's advantage, there's disadvantage. There's, you get to roll two 20-sided dice, take the higher one, or roll two 20-sided dice and take the lower one. It is still the same concept. It is still, you have a target number that you're looking to meet or beat in order to succeed. And it doesn't matter if it's a player rolling the dice, the Dungeon Master rolling the dice for NPCs or monsters or a trap or what have you. It's all the same. And it doesn't matter what you're really doing. So a player who's trying to perceive something is going to roll the same 20-sided die and go through the same process as someone who's looking to learn something about an arcane tome that they found, or trying to stick the pointy end of a short sword into a goblin. It's all the same thing. Now, sometimes it's referred to differently. So like in combat, that DC is actually AC, it's armor class, but it's the same exact concept. You've got a number that needs to be met or exceeded to be able to do damage to your enemy. Now, afterwards, you might roll some other dice. All depends on what you're doing. You know, if you did stick that pointy end into a goblin, yeah, you're going to roll some damage. You're going to roll some dice that represents the damage they took. Maybe you're healing a party member. Got to roll a die to see how many hit points they regain, things like that. But all in all, the core mechanic remains the same. And that core mechanic is pretty much the same for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Pathfinder 2nd Edition just tends to have far more feats and abilities and different aspects that make each player character far more unique and customizable than, say, in 5e D&D, but that action resolution remains the same. Call of Cthulhu, different resolution method, but once you wrap your head around percentile dice, and it is 2 10-sided dice, one is the tens, the other is the single digits. They're going to give you a number between 1 and 100, and you have attributes and skills that are from 1 to, usually it's 99, because 100 is a failure. It's like a critical failure, a fumble. So you're going to have that, and what you're looking to do in this case is you want to roll low. So if you've got, let's say, anthropology skill of 50, and your character is trying to figure out something about this ancient culture that's disappeared to learn more about how that culture may have operated, well, they're going to roll percentile dice, and they're looking to roll 50 or less to succeed. Now, I will admit the newest edition of Call of Cthulhu has a few more tweaks to it where you're actually dividing your skill, sometimes by half if it's more difficult, and so on and so forth. But I'll be very honest, I have been running Call of Cthulhu for over 40 years. I actually don't use that. I still use the old add or subtract percentile based on how easy or difficult something would be. I know, don't tell anybody. I don't want to end up in keeper jail. But that's the whole thing. There is no jail for running the game how you feel most comfortable about running the game. So I'll give you another core mechanic. The Year Zero engine from Free League Publishing. Very, very easy mechanic to wrap your head around. You'll have a pool of 6-sided dice, and depending on how skilled you are, you have more 6-sided dice. And when you attempt whatever has to do with that skill or that ability or that attribute, you roll the 6-sided dice. If you roll a 6, you succeed. Now, depending on the game, sometimes if you roll more than 1 6, it's even more successful. And I know there's some tweaks for like Blade Runner, Alien, Twilight 2000, where you're not only rolling 6-sided dice. You might be rolling a 10-sided die or a 12-sided die. But the concept remains the same, 6 or higher to succeed. Once you've figured out what the core action resolution mechanic is, then you are going to have your finger on the pulse of that game. I also recommend whatever is something that you'll do a lot in a game is something else that you want to make sure that you at least have the basics down, right? So not every role-playing game is going to be focused on a lot of combat. So it doesn't mean that you've got to learn how, got to understand how combat works right away. Yeah, have a clue. But if the role-playing game that you're really interested in running and having your players play is more about investigating mysteries, understand how you find clues or resolve clues. And of course, if a game like D&D or say, Pathfinder or any number of role-playing games that has a bit more combat focus on it, have an idea how combat works. You don't necessarily have to know every rule. You don't need to know, oh, well, what about drowning? Oh, what about falling? What about grappling? It's an inside joke at the Gaming Gang. The grappling rules. You don't need to know all that stuff. Just have a clue of how the core mechanic works and take it from there. So most of the time, the players at your table are not going to be overly concerned with rules. They're going to want to have that framework to work within, and it's mainly just so they understand how they succeed at things, as well as that things seem balanced and that they, as players and as player characters, feel like, well, you know, we've got a little legitimate shot at being successful if we try to do things. That's about it. Now, I'm not saying that you're not going to have somebody who's going to delve into these rule books as if they're studying for the bar, or they're going to be asking you to turn your head and cough, because those people do exist. They're known as rules lawyers, but it's pretty unlikely that you're going to have to deal with them at your table. And if you do, all you need to do is just say, hey, you know what? You might be right, but let's put a pin in this. We'll come back around to it once we finish up the session, but I don't want to bring the adventure to a screeching halt simply because we have a disagreement on a rule. I've made my ruling for now. Let's continue with the adventure, and then at the end of the session, we'll take a look, and by all means, if I'm wrong, I'll make sure from here on out that I apply that rule correctly. And I got to be honest, I've never seen that not work, because you're telling that person, hey, you know what? It's very likely you're right, but for the sake of just continuing to have fun with this adventure, as opposed to being like, okay, well, let's start looking through all the rule books, let's just stick a pin in it. Second thing I would recommend is offload some of the heavy lifting to your players. And what I mean by that is, with a lot of role-playing games, there are certain things that make each player character unique from other player characters. So it could be a class, or it could be skills, or it could be feats or abilities or backgrounds, or wherever their species or culture is, whatever. It shouldn't be your responsibility to know the ins and outs of every one of your players' characters. That's ridiculous. So what I always recommend is, when you roll up characters in your session 0, don't expect to actually play that session. Although, myself personally, I like to play the session we roll up characters. That's just me. I like to strike while the iron's hot. But if you're someone new to a system, learning a system, wrapping your head around it, what I recommend you do is roll up your characters, make sure you've got copies of those character sheets, and take some time out before you play to cut and paste, copy and paste, whatever, the various different special feats or spells or abilities or whatever onto separate sheets that you can print out, include with the player character to your player, so they've got that information in front of them. Because it should be their responsibility to know what special things their character can do. It should not be your responsibility. So if they have different spells, sure, it's nice to have an idea of what that spell does, but do you really need to know every tiny aspect of it? No. Put it in front of the player and have them worry about it. So then you go, oh, so you're going to cast Magic Missile? Yeah, okay, so what does Magic Missile do? And have them tell you. And then, of course, all right, well, you'll probably remember that for next time. But if you don't, ask them again. Now, I will point out it is possible you might have a player who sits there and asks the same damn question over and over and over again in a single session. Wait a second. What does my light spell do again? Thankfully, you won't see that too often, but it does happen. And if that does happen, then if I were you, I would actually question the commitment that player has to actually taking part in your game, because they should at least be able to understand or remember the answer to a question the second time you answer it. But once again, offload some of that heavy lifting to the players. Now, last thing I recommend is whenever you're learning a new system, or if you're new to game mastering, role-playing games, whatever system you're going to run, I recommend you pick up a published adventure to be the first thing that you do run. And of course, make sure that it's focused on beginning characters. Now, there are a lot of fantastic beginner boxes out there. Gets you started with the game, as well as provides you with a starting adventure. And a lot of times it's designed to help you learn the actual rule system and mechanics. But regardless, get a published adventure. And I know game masters out there, doesn't matter if you've been doing this for decades or if you're brand new to it, you've got all these ideas bouncing around in your head and you're like, oh yeah, oh, I want to create a setting that's like this, or I've got a fantastic idea for this adventure or for these monsters. And that's awesome, but pump the brakes. Focus on learning the system first before you start getting into the whole, well, I'm going to create my own setting and things like that, because it is very, very easy to get disheartened when you're not fully versed in a rule system and you're trying to create content for that rule system. So get a published adventure and then read through the adventure a couple of times and make note of the things you need to know. So let's give you a great example. I hear from people all the time about how NPCs and creatures and monsters tend to trip them up. That, you know, it's very hard to try to remember all the differences between, you know, these stat blocks and things like that. Well, don't worry about it. What you want to focus on is what's in the adventure, right? So if you don't have kobolds in an adventure, you don't need to worry about learning anything about kobolds. Just understand the creatures and monsters and NPCs and some motivation for them in that adventure. So to me, that's super, super important. And I'll give you a great idea. Focus on what makes them different. What makes that NPC different than everybody else? What makes that sort of creature or monster different than anything else? Very easy. So, and then play off that. Who cares about the stat block? The stat block's not that important. So there's a concept that I thought is very interesting. I'm not going to go through a whole breakdown of what it is, but it's the 16-point dragon. It's either 16 or 14 hit point dragon. Google it. Very, very interesting concept that your monsters, your creatures, things like that should not focus on stat blocks. It should be the encounter, the combat, the avoiding combat. Those are the memorable things that happen in an adventure. It's not, oh, wow, you know, it was those last 12 hit points that I hit that black dragon with that did it in. That is not what makes for memorable exciting role-playing game adventures. So Google that. Like I said, I think it's 16 point hit point dragon. Check that out. But the reality is just have an understanding about what makes each of the NPCs as well as monster types unique and use that in your adventure. And once again, all you need to do is know about those things. Or even if you've got a longer adventure that you can tell would probably take 3 or 4 sessions, read the whole adventure, understand the adventure, and then focus on that portion of the adventure that you figure you're going to tackle during that first session, plus a little more. Because you don't want to be stuck where it's like, wow, we still have an hour left, and we kind of came to the end of what I was ready for. You don't want that. So once again, everything's got to just be small chunks, easy to digest. So once again, my 3 tips are effectively just understand the core action resolution mechanic of whatever system you're trying to learn. Offload as much of the heavy lifting as you possibly can onto your players regarding their characters and their abilities and such. And run a published adventure first to help wrap your head around how the systems work in that rule set. This is an amazing hobby. I love this hobby. It is fantastic. I wouldn't have spent over 40 years of my life involved with it if I didn't absolutely love it. And I would hate to see people out there miss out on all the fun and camaraderie you get to enjoy with the people at your game table simply because you're intimidated by the rules to a game. Don't let those rules derail your good time. Enough said. All right, thank you very much for hanging out with me and checking this video out. Of course, if you like the video, give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, don't forget, ding that bell, because it'll not only let you know when I upload videos such as this, it'll also inform you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday evenings right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central. And of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit gaminggang.com for all latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more that you won't find here on the YouTube channel. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. All right, thank you very much once again, and until I see you next time, here's hoping each and every one of you gets to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.
Oh, hey, you're still here. That's okay. You don't have to leave just yet. In fact, why don't you subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel right here, or take a peek at the latest live stream, or even find out what YouTube recommends you check out from the channel. And of course, I'm Jeff McAleer. Thanks again for watching.